It is reading 3 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. So welcome to our webinar, folks, Restorative Justice in the Criminal Legal System. Before we begin, we will have a quick word from our funding partners at the Bureau of Justice Assistance, Betsy Griffith.
Thank you, Avery. I really appreciate having a couple minutes here. My name is Betsy Griffith. I am an Associate Deputy Director at the Bureau of Justice Assistance, or BJA as we call it. We're part of the U.S. Department of Justice in a section called the Office of Justice Programs. And really what our agency does is to work across the country to help build the capacity to be able to prevent crime, reduce crime, and help victims. But we also want to make sure that we have many different kinds of strategies that are available to folks, and that we have confidence in the system through the rule of law that helps us strengthen and enhance our criminal juvenile justice system and other ways that we solve challenges in the communities across America. BJA as an organization really focuses on the adult criminal justice system, but it does it in a very broad way, which you'll hear a little bit about today. We work with state, local, and tribal justice systems on these issues, and really are very focused on ways that we can bring restorative justice principles into the work we do throughout the criminal justice system, but also create alternatives for issues that may come up in the community that don't require criminal justice interventions. And so we're so excited about the partnership that we have with the National Center on Restorative Justice that really helps us address some of these strategies that are very much aligned with the department's priorities. Right now, we're very focused on promoting civil rights and really reducing unnecessary criminal justice involvement, but at the same time, ensuring access to justice for everyone, including the victims, and supporting them in that process and bringing healing for them and folks who have criminal justice involvement. And we think that these strategies can be very helpful to really protect the public from ongoing crime challenges, and also very important to building trust with law enforcement and other criminal justice leaders. And really, as part of the work that we do at BJA, my team does, a lot of this is recognizing that everyone, our participants in the criminal justice system, our community leaders, are really at the table and should be at the table co-creating what safety and justice mean in our communities. And we so much value the partnership with Vermont Law School, with the University of Vermont and their partner, the University of San Diego, in this work on the National Center on Restorative Justice. We really recognize that these restorative justice principles and practices are really so important, as I said, to our strategy of accomplishing our goals at BJA, because they offer opportunities to resolve conflict and bring healing, but at the same time ensure accountability that also hopefully prevents future crime from happening and offers opportunities for folks to make different kinds of choices. We really think it's so important, the role that restorative justice brings. It brings a lens of humanity into the work. That is so important. And that also helps to ensure that there is fairness and that we can trust and have confidence that our criminal justice and other community safety strategies are working for everyone. Through the National Center, we've been able to build training and educational resources, really teaching folks in school, the future generations who are going to be so involved, but also training professionals out in the field on how restorative justice can really inform the approaches and advance the research, which is so important. We need to continue to know what works and then translate that knowledge to be able to improve and really make folks aware of these wonderful tools that are available to support them in their work. And I really would say, after many years of working in this field and at BJA, we know that there are a lot of criminal justice leaders that are open to these ideas, these ways that safety can be created in their neighborhood, but that making sure everyone has access to those resources and has the ability to participate in these processes. And so I'm so honored today to really kick off this conversation and share some of these ideas, and hopefully you will be able to learn from this and think about how you apply it in your jurisdiction jurisdiction and come back and continue to work with us on ways that you can improve what you're doing in your communities and your criminal justice system. So we're excited to hear about these examples today that are happening in the context of the criminal justice legal context. And before I turn it back over to Avery to kick us off today, I really again want to thank the team who works together to do this important work at the center, and also Tenzing Laden from my staff who works with them to really make sure that these resources are available to us across the country. So really looking forward to today's conversation.
Thank you, Betsy. Okay, so my name is Avery Arrington. I use she, her pronouns. On behalf of the National Center on Restorative Justice, I want to welcome and thank you all for joining us today. In honor of International Restorative Justice Week, we are thrilled to host panelists that will speak on the different aspects and implementation of restorative practices in a criminal legal context. So please feel free to utilize the Q&A at any time while the panelists are presenting to ask any follow-up questions on anything that you heard or anything you're curious about. And we'll do our best to get through those questions. The National Center on Restorative Justice is a partnership between Vermont Law and Graduate School, the University of Vermont, the University of San Diego, and the U.S. Office of Justice Programs. Special thanks to our funding partners, the Bureau of Justice Assistance, as we're charged with addressing some of the pressing needs in the criminal justice system. We're committed to helping improve policy and practice through research, education for system actors, the general public, and in higher education. So we encourage you to visit our website at NCORJ.org and check out some of the National Center's initiatives, research developments, and educational opportunities we offer. By the way, these resources are free of charge. All right, I'm going to turn it over to Robert Sand, our moderator for today, to kick things off. Take it away, Bobby.
Thank you, Avery. Greetings from wet, cold, and snowy Burlington, Vermont. It's really an honor to be able to moderate our discussion today with some amazing panelists. We are going to start in a somewhat unusual fashion. In a moment, I'm going to ask Avery to advance the slide, and you'll see some words on the slide, and you're only going to have 1 second. And what I'd like you to do in that 1 second is read what's on the slide. So if we could advance the slide for 1 second. Great. So now I know we went into the criminal legal system because we didn't like mathematics, but I think we can count. So how many words did you see on that slide? And I think with any luck, we'll have a poll that will pop up with some options for the number of words you saw on the slide. But maybe not, which is fine. If you are like me, there we go. So if you would please just indicate, did you see 3 words, 4 words, 5 words, or 6 words? So place your vote and let's see what folks say. And I think panelists, we cannot vote. All right, so really interesting. So right off the bat, we see that people see things differently. And that's probably a worthwhile lesson. But the 66% of you saw 4 words. And if you're like me, what you saw was Paris in the spring. But what is interesting is that's not what it says, or at least that's not all that it says. What it says is Paris in the spring. So why do we not see that extra the? Because it doesn't make sense to us. That's not what we are used to. That's not what we are familiar with. It causes us dissonance, and our brains don't like dissonance. Our brains process things the way we know them to be. But once you have seen this for what it actually is, I promise you, you'll never see it the other way again. I want to suggest that once you see the benefits of restorative justice for the criminal justice system, you'll never see the criminal justice system again the same way. And that absolutely happened to me. I was a prosecutor for 22 years, 16 of them as the elected state's attorney, or DA, for Windsor County, Vermont, the largest geographic county in the state, population about 55,000 people. State's attorneys in Vermont have general jurisdiction. So I handled cases from littering to homicide. If I could do it over again, I would do a lot of things differently. And most significantly, what I would do differently is ask a different set of questions. So here are the questions that were frequently asked of me and by me when I was a prosecutor. When I'd return to the office after a jury trial, my staff would ask me, "Did you win?" That was the same question my siblings and my parents asked me when I would come home in high school after a soccer or baseball game or a wrestling match. The criminal justice system is not supposed to be a sport. When I would come back to my office following a contested sentencing hearing, my staff would ask me, "What did you get?" As if the consequences imposed on another human being, as if the punishment and the pain imposed on another human being to teach them not to harm others was somehow a prize for me. That's not justice. And when I would meet with victims, with harmed parties, I would ask them, "What do you want to see happen to the accused?" Restorative justice asks a fundamentally different set of questions, starting with this, starting with asking the harmed party, "What do you need?" That's fundamentally different from "What do you want to see happen?" RJ then asks, who's responsible for causing the harm and what systems contributed to the harm? What obligations arise for the person who caused that harm? How can they make amends to set things right? And how can the overall response, the net response, lead to a strengthening of relationships, community, and to the maximum extent possible to healing and to a positive outcome? So it's worth asking, for what kinds of cases should we ask these new set of questions? What do you need? Who's responsible? What are the obligations? How can they make amends? And the answer, let me suggest, is for every kind of case. Those questions are appropriate across the board. Those questions do not foreclose the possibility of punishment. They do not, in my judgment, foreclose the possibility of incarceration. There are people who pose a present and ongoing risk of harm to others, and separation may be necessary. But the universe of folks for whom that is true is vastly smaller than the number of people we are incarcerating today. So RJ is a philosophy and a set of responses that can improve public safety, enhance victim satisfaction, make the job of law enforcement officers less fraught and more rewarding, and save money. So while RJ is a philosophy, it also is a set of programs. And in a moment, we will hear from our amazing panelists. And as you're listening to the panelists, please consider where in the system, where in the life of a crime and response to crime does their program fit? And what I think you'll see is that RJ responses occur across the spectrum. In the community before police even get involved, through police intervention and arrest, prosecution, trial, conviction, sentencing, incarceration, and release. There is room across the board for restorative responses. So with that, I would like to present to you our panelists. And panelists, what I would like is for each of us to do a very brief introduction. And as we often do in restorative justice, I'm going to give you a prompt. So in addition to just briefly introducing yourself to our audience, would you respond to the following prompt? And it is, if you were a package and had a warning label, what would it say? So I'm Bobby Sand. I use he, him pronouns. I'm a professor at Vermont Law and Graduate School, the founding director of the school's Center for Justice Reform, and I've been involved with the National Center on Restorative Justice from the inception. If I were a package with a warning label, mine would say, please do not use this for home repair projects because you will start them, but you will never finish them. And with that, I will pass to Francisco Carbajal.
All right, thank you so much, Bobby. Yes, my name is Francisco Carbajal, pronouns he, him, his. Commissioner for Juvenile Justice Commission, San Diego County, and also founder of 501c3 organization called Peace, Anger, Love. So my answer to that question is definitely patience. I like to dissect, I like to learn, I like to listen, right? And then, but also at times weird. So you might hear me throw some jokes out there just to keep the flow going, keep the conversation going around. So those are my answers to that question. And I'm gonna pass the virtual talking piece over to Erin.
Thank you, Paco. I'm Erin Freeborn. I use she, her pronouns. I'm the Executive Director of Communities for Restorative Justice. I'm an attorney who entered the field motivated by a passion for restorative practices. I'm a social entrepreneur who has worked for the last decade, encouraging people and programs to think about new ways to create positive social change by making restorative justice more accessible to those in the legal system. And if I had a label, a warning label, it would be warning, passionate. Sometimes that has gotten me in trouble over the years, but always well-intentioned. So I will be passing the talking piece over to Judge Connors.
Well, thank you very much. I am Tim Connors. I'm a state court judge. I'm in my 32nd year as a state court judge. I have been a circuit court judge that handles criminal and civil dockets. I've been a probate judge that handles juvenile, child protection, and estates. I've been as well a district court judge, which is more like a municipal court judge. And I have on assignment been a tribal court judge in our state. I believe that we need to transform our institutions, not only outside of our courts, but inside of our courts. And that's what I believe we need to do. My warning label would say, show kindness. And I pass down, I think, to Eric.
Thank you. My name is Eric Innocent. I'm the Director of Communications and Special Projects for the Transformational Prison Project. I'm also a returning community member, a poet, a chef, a director, a board member, a father, and so much more. If I had to want a label, it'd probably be that I'm a jack of all trades, master of none, but just know that I'm happy to be that because I'd rather have more skills than just one. But with that, I'll pass it on to Noble.
Thank you. My name is Noble. I feel excited to be here. I'm the Senior Director of Programming for TPP, Transformational Prison Project. I'm also on my 5th year as a teacher assistant at Columbia University School of Social Work. And I want to label, thinking hard about, I would say, love is everything. That's what I'm going to go with. Love is everything.
I love these warnings. I'm not nervous about most of the warnings. So in the same order, it would be great if each of you would explain your program. And so hoping in 10 minutes, you can talk about how restorative justice, RJ, works in your area, maybe share some stories. If you can, talk about the impact of RJ in your community, its efficacy, does it work? And then any challenges or obstacles that you have faced with regard to your program. And I will pass our virtual talking piece back to Paco.
All right, thank you, Bobby. And yes, you heard people say Paco. Please call me Paco. Mexican nickname that I've had for quite a while. Once I turn maybe 50 or 60, it might turn into Pancho. So I'm not looking forward to that one, but Paco will do for now. Once again, I go by he, him, his. Yes, that's a picture of me when I had hair also. On the left, a good old punk rocker. All different kinds of colors I used to put up that mohawk. But really quick, I was born and raised on Kumeyaay land, also known as San Diego, California, and Tijuana, Mexico. My story began before I was even born with the great work that my mom, my grandma, my great-grandma did in Southern California and Mexico, working with outreach programs in LA, San Diego, just to help feed the poor and develop a clinic for the poor in Tijuana in the neighborhood that I grew up in. Fast forward a few years to my high school years in San Diego, I took part in the best and the worst the community had to offer, including being a part of so many different subcultures that welcomed me with open arms, no matter who I was. Joined a couple punk rock bands, as you can see right there in the picture, and traveled the world. Fast forward even a few more years, I graduated from San Diego State University, and now I'm a commissioner for San Diego's Juvenile Justice Commission and founder of Peace, Anger, Love, a 501c3 nonprofit that will begin restorative justice diversion programs come early 2023. But in my prior work, I was a director of alternative juvenile justice at the National Conflict Resolution Center, where we were able to implement and expand the restorative justice diversion program and implement the district attorney's juvenile diversion program as well. Next slide, please. So before I move forward, I just want to share a brief story. So this gentleman right here that you see, his name is Eric, a young person who came from the United States to support his family, do better for himself, and live the American dream. I do want to throw another warning out. I do get teary-eyed a lot, especially when I'm sharing stories. His journey wasn't easy though. Lots of trauma, physical abuse, emotional abuse. He was lost and quickly losing hope. So he reacted very wrong at school. That led law enforcement to get involved. The person harmed wanted to press charges, but instead accepted the different path, a restorative path that was offered by law enforcement. So when we came in, Eric was screaming for help, searching desperately for anyone that would listen. That's when a restorative practitioner took over his case, a restorative practitioner that gave him a voice, listened to him, and concentrated on his passions and drew out many of his strengths. At the same time, that restorative practitioner was supporting the person harmed, giving them a voice as well, helping them navigate around their feelings and emotions. And once trust and relationship was built, which is very important for restorative justice, it was time to bring accountability, genuine accountability and healing. So that restorative circle conversation that we all know very well. That collective wisdom in that circle was incredible. The wisdom of Eric's family, counselor, teacher, a mentor with lived experience of the criminal justice system, but most importantly, the person harmed, their kids, a San Diego State University soccer coach, the team captain, all of them together creating a sense of community for everyone and a sense of belonging for Eric. You could actually feel the healing happening for the person harmed. And of course, as we all know, tears and much laughter also. So Eric's passion for soccer was elevated by the coach that we invited and also the team captain, because they were able to share their own struggles, letting them know that he's not alone, and advise Eric to really just channel and focus that energy on things he loves or what at least wants to accomplish. So years later, about Eric, he's a father of an amazing 2-year-old girl, manager for a construction company, plays soccer especially when he needs to decompress, a mentor to other youth, and now he is a board youth advisor to the board of directors at Peace, Anger, Love. So it's definitely full circle with Eric. Next slide, please. All right, so what did community accomplish right here? There's a couple quotes there I just want you to read as I'm sharing some of the content behind those quotes. So they were able to build trust, which is very important, build relationships, build community, and of course, resilience. The community accomplished genuine accountability. And as we all know, accountability is a main concern that is heard all across law enforcement agencies. So genuine accountability was built starting with Eric accepting services much sooner than the traditional system would have offered. The community accomplished diverting one of their young people away from the traditional system into a path of resilience. So an alternative to punishment that he might have received. And most importantly, gave a loud and clear voice to the person harmed, who was able to move forward without fear or concern of seeing Eric at school on a daily basis. So healing that harm, an internal feeling that we all know that is so hard to address through the traditional systems. So a lot of you know this restorative action as restorative justice diversion. It wasn't easy to establish though. It began with understanding the community's needs, creating community collaboratives, steering committees, building knowledge of restorative justice, building a bank of data and statistics, finding champions, as you all know, at the district attorney's office, at probation, at the public defender's office, law enforcement, school districts, and community organizations. So community for this specific project in San Diego was able to implement the diversion program at exit point number 3, which I'm going to talk about here shortly. Next slide, please. All right, so here it is. Don't worry about the big mess that's around this flowchart right here, okay? I'm just going to concentrate on that number 3 that is so important. So this is San Diego's landscape currently. Everyone needed to build knowledge of their current juvenile justice landscape in the county. What this led to offering restorative justice right there at that start, number 3, exit point, which is a pre-charge program, so that at the pre-charge level. That would allow the youth to honestly answer no to that question about ever being arrested before on job applications. The youth can honestly answer no to that question. So sealing those records for policies and procedures that you see there at the bottom that were reformed over time with the help from the public defender's office, a couple council members, and the district attorney as well, to ensure that the records were sealed or there were non-disclosure protocols in place. So of course, what we all want here, and you'll hear a little bit more about, is our young people to exit the system at the earlier exit point, which is exit point number 1 right there. If a fight happens at school, no expulsion, and a restorative response is offered without law enforcement contact. That would be our hope, that we can all get there. Once programs are in place at all exit points of the justice system, the community can move into transforming the whole system itself into maybe a care first model like Los Angeles County is currently undergoing. So the community was able to build trust and even more buy-in by capturing key outcomes and immediately making them available to everyone, because transparency was key, including decision makers, policy advocates, and the rest of the public. Next slide, please. All right, so a couple numbers here. So studies show that 1 out of 4 victims receive actual support from the criminal justice system, 1 out of 4. Well, 92% of people harmed that participated in restorative justice diversion said there was a reduction of fear or concern. 98% of people harmed that participated in restorative justice diversion said they received a sense of justice. And we don't get that data point in many programs out there, the sense of justice, which is very important. That's a 98%. Only 16% of youth recidivated after 3 years of restorative program completion, and only 8% after 1 year of restorative program completion. So of course, this is compared to the traditional trends found in report on recidivism from the Center of Juvenile and Criminal Justice, which found 50% of youth recidivated at the 3-year mark in 2014 and 53% in 2017 after completing traditional criminal justice programming. And of course, the savings, cost savings for taxpayers. So taxpayers can save thousands of dollars per referral to restorative programs. Approximately $16 million was saved during the pilot phase of a restorative justice program in Southern California. And that was for only 190 cases that was referred. So 190 cases that were referred and $16 million was saved for the taxpayers. So now we have law enforcement, especially new recruits coming in, asking about RJ diversion, which is a huge mind shift. This is what we've been waiting for too. The DJJ, Division of Juvenile Justice, and is transitioning to the Department of Youth and Community Restoration in California, all under Health and Human Services, which is great because everyone's hard work and collaboration up and down the coast of California. So definitely props to all of them that have been working together and collaborating. Next slide, please. All right, so now it wasn't easy to reach those outcomes either, and we're continuing to improve on all of that. It took months of meetings, sharing different perspectives, gathering data, learning new and innovative practices, not just evidence-based practices. A lot of redesigning of the program itself or key components of the program. But a main challenge that remains to this day is a concern of net widening. So the social control of our young people when addressing a harm. When there's more emphasis for repairing the harm is moving away from later exit points that you noticed earlier on, is now moving into more earlier exit points at the pre-charge level under community control. So we want to expand on that. So these are some of the current items that we're advocating for through the Juvenile Justice Commission work that we're doing. So more diversion contracts with multiple community organizations at earlier exit points is to provide law enforcement with more options to divert youth with multiple needs, including those with high risks to recidivate. Policies and procedures for law enforcement and organizations for the sealing of non-disclosure of the records. Policies and procedures for screening eligibility, which is important too. This helps avoid sending youth to unnecessary intervention that can lead, of course, to the misuse of taxpayers' funds. And policies and procedures for newly learned information by diversion service providers. This helps to avoid making community an investigative body to the justice system. All right, and I believe last slide. Yep, a big bummer, but we're done. We barely touched the surface of the work that I'm doing, really the community is doing. So no matter where you are in your work, in your field, I hope you can take a couple pointers away from this, and we're more than happy to catch up later. But thank you so much, and thanks to the team that put this event together. All right, so I believe we're still doing a circle here. So I'm gonna pass that talking piece over to Erin.
Thank you, Paco. Again, I'm gonna begin with the story. It was about 3:30 on a Saturday morning in September when Mike was walking home from a friend's house. He decided to cut across the Boston Commons, even though it was dark and even though he was alone. After all, he only lived 2 blocks past the park. He was about midway through when he saw a few shadows approaching. He felt a little nervous, but he decided to push on. He was almost home. Then one of the figures said something. Mike couldn't quite make it out, but then he heard it again. Give us all your money. Surely this was a joke, Mike thought. He replied, sorry, man, I don't carry cash, and he walked on. But they came closer and said it again. Give us all your money. And the tallest guy in the group pulled out a gun. Mike didn't know what to do. He paused, and then he decided to keep walking a little faster this time. And he said again, I don't have any. Then somehow the guy with the gun stumbled. So Mike ran. But as he was running, he heard a girl yell, shoot him, shoot him. Mike braced himself to get shot in the back as he ran faster than he'd ever run before, calling 911 while he ran. Mike connected with the police, and a few minutes later, the police apprehended the 13-year-old female and 17-year-old male who were involved in the incident. When the responsible party turned over the gun, everyone realized it was a BB gun. Both juveniles were arrested. When the case was in court, Mike found out the ages of the parties, but then he had more questions than anything. He was upset, but he really wanted to understand why. Mike described to us at C4RJ that he was scared, angry, traumatized, but most importantly, he said he was robbed of his sense of safety in his own neighborhood. He had trouble sleeping, fear of it happening again, and distrust of people around him. His parents, who lived out of state, now worried about him and his safety, which he actually found embarrassing because he was in his 30s. When C4RJ met with the responsible party with the gun, the young man said he'd been celebrating his birthday with some friends, that they'd smoked some weed and they just were hanging in the park. But then they decided to prank someone. He didn't fully understand why everyone was upset. He said that it was just a prank and that if Mike had actually given them money, he would have given it back. The responsible party was facing a felony charge of armed robbery. The courtroom process would have forced our two parties apart, Mike and our responsible party. It would have focused on whether or not the state could prove the elements of the charges. It would not have helped the responsible party gain empathy or understanding. And it would not have helped Mike get the answers to his most important question. Why? Is that justice? What is justice? What does justice look like and feel like to you? Slide, please. In general, but also in this case, what did it look like to Mike? And perhaps most importantly, what does our system allow us to do to meet Mike's needs? I'd argue that the justice that the courtroom process is set up to achieve is not the justice that Mike needed or wanted. As he described what he wanted, the prosecutor recognized that he was actually describing restorative justice. So what is restorative justice? Slide, please. Chapter 276B is a section of the Massachusetts Criminal Code that acknowledges restorative justice as a valid option for criminal cases anywhere from pre-arraignment to disposition. Most importantly, this definition acknowledges that restorative justice is a voluntary process, that it's focused on identifying needs, increasing understanding, and an acceptance of responsibility. All of this while taking steps to make repair. The Massachusetts legislation created a confidentiality provision to protect the process, and it created an advisory committee of system stakeholders and RJ practitioners to help track and support this work. The legislation doesn't house this work in the system. It simply allows the system to send cases out to community-based restorative justice programs to do this work, like C4RJ. So how do we at C4RJ do this? First, I think it's important to stress that all of our work is guided by restorative principles. We strive to focus on the harms and needs created by an incident, to address the obligations that resulted from the incident, to be an inclusive, collaborative process, to involve those with a stake in the situation, and to make things as right as possible. And we're working to put key decisions into the hands of those most affected by a crime, to make justice more healing and ideally more transformative, to reduce the likelihood of future offenses, which of course leads to a common buzz phrase of reducing recidivism. And in order to meet those goals, we know that the work requires impacted parties to be involved and satisfied with the process, and responsible parties need to work to develop and demonstrate empathy. Our agreements must be specifically tailored to both the victims and the responsible parties' needs. And ultimately, we are working to move forward in the best way possible and with intentionality to reintegrate the responsible party back into their family and community in ways that can help restore their reputations. Let me tell you about our community-based restorative justice program, Communities for Restorative Justice. Our organization began in 2000 when a few community members in a Boston suburb began to learn about restorative justice. As they learned about it more, they wondered why it wasn't happening in their community. And when they brought in the chief of police, he agreed, and he decided to start referring cases instead of sending them to court. At first, they were just juvenile cases. But over the last 22 years, C4RJ has created partnerships with 29 police departments and 3 district attorneys' offices across Massachusetts. Last year, 50% of our cases were adults and 50% of the referred charges were felonies. Just like many nonprofits, we have a small staff and a dedicated board of directors, but our power really comes from the more than 150 community-based volunteers spread across the region. These are our communities of care. Trained community members from any professional and personal background that represent their community and respond when there's a crime that's referred to C4RJ. Our model is that when a case comes in, we go through an intensive intake process to determine who should be included in the circles. We have an opening circle to determine what happened, what needs were created, and what are we going to do about it? And then the circle creates a restorative agreement. Over the next weeks and months, each responsible party works with 2 C4RJ community-based volunteers, again, ideally from the community where the harm took place. These volunteers work with the responsible party on reflective exercises, decision-making exercises, and anything else that might be included in the agreement. We especially love it if there are creative or artistic items. When that work is complete, the group from the beginning comes back together in a closing circle. This circle discusses what the responsible party did and what the responsible party learned. Our work is based on being in right relationship with one another, and C4RJ is working to help people find those relationships and connections and repair them. People often ask what types of cases we take. And what they really want to know is whether we have a list of crimes that we will and will not take. They're wondering if we'll take an assault and battery, but not an ABDW. But that's not the way this works. RJ works for any harm if the parties are right. So I tell people, back one slide. Sorry. All right, so I tell people that what we need is a responsible party who's willing to take responsibility for their actions. Keep in mind that this is not the same as legal guilt. And under the Massachusetts statute, participation in restorative justice cannot be used as an indicator of criminal or civil liability. So then we need an impacted party who will allow the process to move forward. We'd love to have them face-to-face with a responsible party, but we can work with a statement, a surrogate, or a representative, whatever they feel comfortable with. And ultimately, we're working to make sure that we can create as safe a space as possible. We're trying to make sure that there are not other mental health or substance needs that should be addressed before the person is ready to come into circle. But of course, for those who really want to know what types of cases we work on, next slide, please. Here's a list of offenses that we worked on last fiscal year. You'll see that assault and battery, larceny, property crimes, and breaking and entering are common offenses. But you'll also see that every year we have some cases, one or two, that carry offenses that you may not expect to be referred out of the courtroom. These are cases that when the law enforcement partners we work with look past the offense, they see that there's more to the story. They see the humanity of the parties and potential for repair. They can see past the felony armed robbery charges and see a victim who was robbed of his sense of safety in his own neighborhood, one who was driven by the question, why? They see a teenager who didn't fully understand the impact of his actions, who was willing to engage and was interested in fixing what he did wrong, even if he didn't know what that meant yet. We're working in a space that allows for creativity and imagination, a space that allows Mike to take steps through and past his trauma by returning to the scene of the crime with the responsible party who demanded all of his money. I can tell you that we're moving towards a system that recognizes that a resolution to this case can include the two men standing on the Boston Commons together, talking about basketball and future life plans. That is what justice can feel like, and that is what restorative justice can help us achieve. Now I'll pass the talking piece to Judge Connors to share about his experiences. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Erin. This courtroom is the Pokagon Band Tribal Court here in Michigan, where I sit as a state court judge. And you can see that the courtroom is circular. There are equal chairs. This was designed by the tribal architects. In the center, you see an actual fire pit. So many of the circles are done with ceremony and around a fire. And you can see the copper, which is a healing element that takes the vents out. The wood that's on these walls is the local woods on the reservation. And all the community members got those and cut them and brought them in. And I've had the privilege to sit in that courtroom and participate. I show it at the beginning because, and I would like to leave it there, because I think we start with the notion of how do our spaces reflect our values. And this is the creation of a space and place, and the work that I have been trying to do with the support of our Michigan Supreme Court and with our tribal courts is to create a concurrent path that in essence, a space and a place for peacemaking, which we'll talk about, and restorative justice. Think about the difference in the dynamics in our traditional courtrooms. I remember when I've been on the bench 32 years and I've been the chief judge for 11 of those years. I remember that during my tenure as a chief judge, that we had outside groups coming in on facilities and architects and saying, your courtrooms aren't intimidating enough. You need bigger spaces and judges higher up and all of that. And the dynamic of the spaces we create in our justice systems are meant to intimidate, to make someone feel humble, humiliated, and lawyers, they don't even talk to the judge. Everybody has to talk to the judge through lawyers or at each other through the court. Our Supreme Court, when we were learning about this, said, there's value to this, and gave me the authority and has backed it for now over a decade. And when we compare the two value systems in our traditional system here in the state courts, it really focuses and is a result of colonization. And it focuses on what we call the 4 Ps, meaning it's an emphasis on property. We view everything as property, even other human beings. It's an emphasis on proscription, laws that say thou shalt not, and it's under the theory that that's going to be the architect of a better society. It focuses on punishment to put teeth into that proscription, and ultimately the end result is power and control. The traditional indigenous justice systems is called peacemaking, and they view it as a cousin to restorative justice, but it reflects community. And the four the 4 points of that are what we call the R's. And it focuses first on relationships. And I don't mean, trivia like eligible bachelor on TV and all that garbage. What I mean by that is the relationships of all things and its connectiveness, because we are all connected. And what happens, either good or bad, has ripple effects not only out to the community in the present, but into the future as well. It focuses on responsibility. Our system talks about, accountability, and that's a concept of a hierarchy or superiority. But responsibility is internal. Responsibility is between each other. Responsibility is to the community, and the community back to the individual. The peacemaking's next principle is respect. That the idea that during conflict, and no matter how difficult a situation is what happened, we need to respect the spirit of the human being inside and understand that even if they behave badly, there always can be an opportunity for a person to learn from a harm they've created and change. And the fourth principle is resiliency. The idea that we can continue to remember those events that helped us feel nurtured and loved and cared for. And we need to incorporate those kinds of things and nourish those types of things rather than just anger or cynicism or distrust. When the Supreme Court said, all right, go try it, find out, you have the authority to do it, I did get an administrative order, and we have applied peacemaking to every kind of case in the state justice system. And the goal is to say we do want to create this concurrent space and place, not just as a diversionary track, but as a part of our institutional beliefs and values and in partnership with our community. The goal truly is institutional transformation, and we have been applying it to every type of case. I will tell you one story, which is pertinent, I think, to what we're talking about in the criminal justice system. And I wanted to use just quickly a visual to make a point, and it's an hourglass. And you can't see it, but the little grains are falling through. It takes 15 minutes for it all to come through. But I do believe in the criminal justice system in particular. It is so much of an industry of incarceration that we lose sight that these are truly human beings, and we process it and we just discard, dump them through. I'll tell you one story, one of these grains of sand. And it was a case where we have a prosecutor, had a prosecutor, he lost, and we have a new prosecutor, but the old prosecutor has fought me on this from day one. He was vocal against peacemaking and restorative justice. And some of my colleagues on the bench, the criminal judge likewise, was vocal and really tried to destroy our attempts at restorative justice. There was a serious case. It was a felony firearm. Young man was convicted for attempted murder. The attitude of the prosecutor and the judge were part of the appeal, and the case was reversed by the Court of Appeals. And in reversing it, they talked about the error that had been made and directed that it be sent to a new judge. In their request, we had a new prosecutor. The new prosecutor said, no, we believe in restorative justice. We believe error had been committed. Our victim wants restorative justice. And the chief judge sent the case my way. I'd like to read to you what the victim said to me and when it came back down, they had a new plea agreement, and I was the new sentencing judge. And as part of the sentencing, I had indicated that they can do the restorative process and they should sit in circle, and they were willing to do it. Here is what the victim said to me before the sentencing. It was addressed to me and the new prosecutor. Here are his words. I wrote a letter for the defendant's last sentencing to say that I was not interested in a punitive sentence being given to the defendant. I did not think him being put in prison would address my issues or help us understand what happened that night or make anyone better going forward. Unfortunately, at that time, no one listened to me, and the defendant was sent to prison for over 2 years. It was actually a relief for me when his conviction was changed and he came back for a new sentence. I appreciated that the new prosecutor talked to me and listened to me and took my wishes into consideration about no more punishment. I am also grateful that the defendant and I were able to meet in the restorative justice program to talk about what happened, why it happened, our thoughts about it. I was able to tell him how I was harmed, and I got to understand what was going on with him and how he has also been hurt by all this. The meeting helped both of us, and I believe he truly takes responsibility for his actions and is sorry, and that he should be able to go forward and live his life without any more burdens. He has been punished enough, and he understands, and I don't want any more. And then he said, thank you for listening to me. So the point that the former prosecutor, reform prosecutor Sands make is right on the money, that this, and what Aaron is saying, this helps people. It does not further the harm. So that was the sentence. He's sentenced to probation. The prosecutor agreed to that. The Michigan Department of Corrections did not. And so I said, fine, if you're not going to help me, then I don't need your involvement in the case. So his probation consists of checking in with me and our community members monthly, and he's going to be discharged soon. He has a job, he's back in school, he has a girlfriend, he's giving, he's really, and is that not the goal? Someone learns from it, the person who's harmed can understand, can heal, and people change. So I'd like to share that story. That's just an example. We've been in the program now for 10 years. I've got all kinds of stories, but I thought that particular one might be helpful to this discussion today. I think I'm done a little bit early. I pass it off to you, Eric.
Thank you. So to give you an example of RJ and our work and how we do, I really speak about myself. I think the best examples of our work is myself, Noble, and the leaders of our organization. And the reason is to explain that organization started inside of Norfolk Prison here in Massachusetts, one of the state's largest prisons, in the prison that held the largest amount of long-termers in the state, those serving 15 years or better, and those serving the most life sentences within the state. But it was a community-based prison, and it was a prison that gave individuals elected positions and autonomy on creating programming. And in 2010, when a young man was almost killed in that prison, those individuals, having that autonomy, wanted to find a way to combat the violence that was happening there. For myself, I was already incarcerated at this point in time. I was probably about 24-ish and in maximum security prison, where I was serving a 16-year sentence. For myself, I grew up in a sadly, I would say a typical story in this country. A household that dealt with a lot of violence, substance abuse, neglect, and an open door for the street lifestyle. And because of that, I will spend myself 15 odd years. And at this point in time, serving a 16-year sentence as an armed career criminal that I was sentenced to at the age of 23. But as I said, this would happen inside this prison. And the men there, a group of lifers along with an outside volunteer, would would find restorative justice. That would be the answer. And they would start something called the Restorative Justice Group. Their idea was to bring in community members. How do we bring in our resources? How do we address the traumas, the harms? How do we address the thing that led to the thing? How do we address why we do what we do? So they brought in survivors. We didn't have the opportunity because of the way the state's law operates to bring in those from incidents directly involved in us. So we brought in surrogate survivors, those that can share a lived experience, something we believe a lot in, not the academic nature of it or the textbook nature of it, but really share their experience. What are the things how did what happened in the community affect them? How what happened to them affected them? How did they survive afterwards? How did they reach the level of being a survivor? How then sharing their pains. And for myself, I got to witness that in 2014 when I made it down to Norfolk Prison in their restorative justice retreat, where they would have individuals, survivors from the community, law enforcement, police officers, district attorneys, share their experiences and share their stories, but also have individuals incarcerated, those with 20, 30 years in, those I know are beyond their appeal status, and they're not apologizing for no one in that room but themselves. Them tears are not for anyone in that room but themselves. But for me, it showed me, one, if I'm honest, at first it showed me like I thought the men were crazy. I'm like, I don't know why they're in this room, 300 people crying. If I'm being honest, it was basically something that my young self probably didn't think at that moment I could do. But also in the back of my brain, when the shit is one of the men, honored that they even had the courage, what I knew I was scared to do, to even shed a tear in front of somebody. But being able to witness, the survivors for me was my most touching moment. And it's because it kind of really did touch close to my home, and a young man that lost his life in my neighborhood, and witness his mother and father ask questions about how did their child pass away that day? Was he involved? Was he this? Was he that? Answers that I had, answers that I can give, that wasn't mine. Now, I'll be honest, wasn't involved directly in this young man's murder. It was my neighborhood that continued that war. It was my neighborhood that started that war, that young man was caught in between. And I can answer those questions for his mother. I can tell them that he was innocent, that he truly was just minding his business that day. And they can, for my mind, is offer some type of healing. For me, getting the opportunity to give that apology was when I probably seen empathy for the first time in my life. Something in our work and what we do inside the institutions is practice our values. And when I apologized to that mother and father, and she apologized back to me and offered me a hug, I never felt value in my apology. Every time I pled out to a sentence, it was locked away, no community, no nothing. Every time I tried to argue my right in the court, it was seen as if I was wrong for even saying anything in the opposite of what the district attorney or the state wanted to prove. I've never seen a victim that spoke to him and never even had an opportunity to offer apology or even understand the ramifications that my action caused them into that day inside that restorative justice retreat. But I will learn through our programming, through the 8-week reading group we would do, through our 34-week Vogue education group, that a lot of my traumas and harms, a lot of the reasons why I acted out in violence was my learned behavior in my home. It was my traumas, it was my harms, it was myself being a victim and being a survivor. My survival mechanism was to harm back. And so I learned why I even did it. See, I didn't even understand that my notion to harm was me trying to not be harmed. Until I learned, until I sat inside that Vogue group and looked at my life. We did exercises, one called a timeline, one called within that sits within a criminal impact statement, statement. And in this statement, you would really, write about your life before your crime, what happened at the moment, during, and after. And for me, really reflecting on how I just overlooked or didn't pay attention to the harms I created in my community, really showing me how I felt as a child when I would get beat, when I sat in the classroom and a cop hit me and the guidance counselor looked at me and turned their eyes away. For me, I was always overlooked when I was harmed. So it took me to really just learn within our work that I was also a victim. To recognize that myself, my own harms, to give that empathy for me to feel towards the individuals in my community. Now, I say the word victim here. I would have never said that before. You couldn't call me a victim. We would have fought. What do you mean? I'm not soft. I'm not a victim. And that's not a word that I comfortably accept. But as I learned to accept, I learned to feel my pain. In essence, understand the pain that I caused. For me, getting that empathy, being able to grow into leadership within the restorative justice program there, which was really built off of creating, giving individuals with lived experience an opportunity to an opportunity for themselves to do right and creating leadership and creating community. I was able to lead with Noble, Bobby Arcavello, and Amon Coleman, who's the lead of our organizations. The Young Men Evolutions Group that really dealt with the demographic between 18 and 30. And our real belief was that in our target was those that were considered the worst of the worst, those considered undeemable. And we knew that those individuals, as I was considered, had autonomy and live experience in this work that can touch more and that can build communities. And you'll see that in our work as Noble shares next in Department of Youth Services, in National Street, running circles in the federal system, and how we pivot our work during COVID and during our reentry to really answer the reentry needs of those returning into our community, those that were deemed violent, deemed incapable of receiving programming, incapable of actually changing their actions, how we was able to pivot that help and services to them. But with that, I actually pass it off to you, Noble.
Thank you for sharing that and just being vulnerable and just opening up. So I'll touch on before the age of 10. So our organization is based in Boston, and I was born and raised in Boston. So I said before the age of 10, me and my mother witnessed a friend get murdered right in front of us, and that experience. Went to the police station, and all they really cared about was who did it. Do we know who did it? And since we didn't have the information to know about who did the murder, we just got sent home. That shut me down, as well as like living in that household I lived in was like a lot of violence, a lot of activity going on, as well as just growing up in the projects. I spent a lot of my life living in fear, and was gravitating me to the streets to really find a comfort, a family, a comfort, a home. And on that journey, I didn't have no resources. I didn't have no way of understanding myself and really realizing the ripple effect of trauma that affected me. And I realized, like, going through restorative justice process, that hurt people. And before I committed my first crime, was so many crimes committed against me. I realized that I was silent at a very young age. I did 8 months in DYS homes. I did 8 months in the juvenile system, and then actually did 3 years after that in the juvenile system. On June 2nd, 2004, my son was born, and I was sitting on Harvard Street detention when they called up to the juvenile system to tell me that I had a healthy boy. And I figured, like, through that process, maybe I will change, and I want to be the best father I possibly can be. I just didn't know how to have a father figure in my life to really show me and teach me on the ropes on how to be successful. Coming home, I found myself still deep in the streets, still being gang related and just running around causing so much harm. I ended up getting sentenced to a 9-12 sentence, which I served 10 years on that 9-12 sentence. going through restorative justice, I could say today that I committed a crime and I'm responsible for it. And I also could bear witness to that during the time was easy, doing restorative justice was very difficult. That was the first time in my life I had to look myself in the mirror and really take accountability. Every day I spent in prison, I was re-traumatized every single day. It really, how can I really think about what I did and how to do better? Being in the restorative justice circles allowed me to really, first time I was ever asked, Noble, what happened to you? What led you on this path? The first time I was able to tell my story, because I also realized that even though I was a survivor and I was a survivor my whole life, once I committed that crime, I was no longer looked at as a survivor when it came to the courts. I just went from a survivor to someone that harmed somebody. And I realized that through this work, today, me and my son have a beautiful relationship. And I'll just tell you a quick story. RJ taught me how to own patience, how to be vulnerable. It also taught me how to build empathy. I've been home for 2.5 years. My first year at home, my son lost his best friend. His best friend was murdered. And the first 48 hours is not about catching a person or finding the person that committed the murder. I lived my whole life in the streets. The first 48 hours is really about revenge. Through FaceTime, I kept my son in the house for almost a week. And he was hurting. He didn't know how to process what he was dealing with. And I said, listen, it's okay to cry. You're hurting and you lost someone very close to you. And it's okay to talk about it. And my son started crying. And I started crying with him. I held space with him. And we stayed up all night, every day. And I helped him through that process. The same way the men in Norfolk helped me to process my trauma. Today, we do work in DYS, the same very DYS I spent 6 months in, the same juvenile place I spent 3 years in. We're now in those very same places working with the young men. Why? Because we have the lived experience, and those who's closest to the problem have the solution. And we all know the history of how many people that's Black and brown that's incarcerated. So the fact that I look like every single last one of those men that's in that place, they can relate and they understand how what I've been through, I know what they've been through, and together, how do we build community? We also do work in corporate community building, a lot of work within our communities as well. We're doing work with the courts, Roxbury Court, and throughout this weekend, we will be doing a turkey drive. So all the young men right now that's on both of the DYS units, we already called their families up, and we will be dropping turkeys and food off to their family for the holiday. And I spoke to her mother today, and her biggest fear was that her son committed a crime and the whole community looked down upon her. No one wants to talk to her or deal with her because of what her son was accused of. And that's the same with everything my mother had to go through too. When I committed my crime, she moved because the shame and the guilt of my actions. So on the way here today, I sat on the phone with that mother for half an hour and spoke to her and said, y'all have our support. And we will be seeing your son today, and we will let him know how much you love him. And so the work is on full circle. I was once a person I was hurting, and I was hurting other people. And today, I'm a young man that did work on my healing. And now we're in the community doing that same healing and giving back. We also work with we do work with youthful offenders as well, men that went in at the age of 16, young boys that went at the age of 16, and they come home at the age of 40, 50 years old. And we also have a program for them. We do mental health with our social workers. We have a safe space for them to come. We help them through their reentry, because we know what that reentry look like, and the fact that the struggle that when you commit a violent crime, there's not really that many programs and resources for you. So I didn't have that coming home. So Transformation Prison Project became that for those that's coming home and those inside the community. And there's also the fact that we're no longer in the streets. That alone is public safety. Thank you.
Thank you all for those great presentations, and as well for sharing some some personal life journeys. Let me just try to encapsulate some of the things that I heard. First, your programs really do cover the spectrum from community responses before police are involved all the way through to release back in the community following incarceration. There's room for RJ everywhere. I was struck by language. We talk about harm parties, we talk about responsible parties. I think responsible is such an interesting word because a responsible party is someone who did something, but it's also someone who has obligations. And the conventional system divests people of their obligation, their responsibility to make things right. We heard about the importance of collaboration. Building these programs requires partners, prosecutors, judges, community members, legislators. The importance of relationships and how responses can strengthen relationships. We've also heard that RJ is hard. Active accountability is a lot harder than passive accountability. And I don't mean to minimize the brutality of incarceration, but there someone is receiving something. In restorative responses, the person has to be active in taking accountability, and that includes self-reflection, something that many people are really uncomfortable doing. We heard about the importance of voice and choice. And instead of having conveyor belt responses, how do we listen to people most directly affected and create some choice, some options for shaping responses? And finally, we heard and we have learned that people can change. And let's not create immediate responses that seemingly address the tension of the moment without looking to the long game. And where do we want people to be down the road? And let's have enough vision, let's have enough courage to craft responses that allow people to grow and change and become the people who they really can be. I think collectively, we are brave enough and courageous enough to embed and infuse our system with restorative responses across the board. And with that, I will hand things back to Avery, I should say the awesome Avery Arrington, who didn't introduce herself, but might and will be fielding, responding to some questions. Avery, to you.
Thank you, Bobby, and thank you all to all our panelists for sharing your work and your experiences. I'm sure our attendees have appreciated it, as I can see that in some of the questions and comments that were left. I didn't introduce myself. I thought I did, but it wasn't thorough enough. But I am with the National Center. I oversee the training division. Part of my role is to provide introductory RJ, like a focus on criminal legal context information and resources. So this is part of what I do, and just grateful to be in community with you all today. Okay, so we're gonna get to questions. I know we're winding down on time. I'll do my best to get to most, but it looks like Paco, you're up first. You offered to answer the first couple questions, which is, how was the recidivism calculated for kids who turned 18 within 3 years upon entering the program?
Yeah, so great question. First of all, as restorative practitioners, is staying in touch with actual youth, just in case something starts going a different way. You know, it's definitely to come in with the same resources before law enforcement gets involved. But the important part about the steering committees, I did mention about the steering committee. So it's not the program administrator, it's not justice partners making decisions. It's actually the steering committee that includes community advocates. It's ran by a community advocacy program, and then youth are involved and other partners as well. The public safety director as well, to ensure that the right services, the right direction is for the program. So, and to ensure integrity and confidentiality too. So reaching out to the evaluator of the program, the researcher of the program, the probation admin. At least in California, it's probation that can check on those numbers, and making sure that we're just using the birth date as well, not any of the names that were used. So yeah, it's very important that the integrity is held when we're checking for recidivism. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. And Paco, you said you would answer this one, but I'm gonna throw it out to any of the panelists. When RJ programming is embedded in the criminal legal system, how can we be sure it doesn't replicate the inherent biases in that system? From who gets referred to how programs are implemented? Great question.
I can answer that. I think it's quite an easy answer for myself, by putting people in there with lived experience and actually employing community members. By really making it about the system that is actually with the people that's involved. If it's that, I always tell people, like, there's so many different communities within the criminal justice system. So you even have like the individual within our state, part of his honorary network, where, he spent 20 plus, 30 plus, almost 30 years incarcerated, but now he's using his strength as a paralegal to fight, to be a pillar in that system. So it's not just those that are formerly incarcerated, those within our honorary network, where within our state that is growing rapidly. So, just employing those with the lived experience, those that have that within the system, I think can do that.
Avery, excuse me, Avery, that question is a very specific concern, and the Vera Institute is doing a year-long study of this in Washtenaw County. They are going to give us a written report and recommendations by the end of this year, and I'm happy to share that with you. But you're absolutely, I think that question is excellent. Those are the kinds of mindful things we need to be thinking about as we move forward. But I will share that with you, okay?
Avery, may I add that one way to do it, and I think we will see more states doing this, is mandated referral to community-based programs. So an identified set of crimes are going to the community. So instead of an off-ramp, it is the default. And if it is part of legislation, then it is race, gender, economic blind. Those cases are going to the community for a restorative response.
I appreciate that you mentioned that, Bobby. I also want to lift up another approach that we're trying in Massachusetts, and we're about 18 months into, a little beyond. We partnered with a district attorney in Western Massachusetts, David Sullivan, who wanted to make sure that he could bring restorative justice to his jurisdiction. And he identified police chiefs who were willing to adopt an identical policy that used an objective referral criteria. And so that's another way, short of creating legislation, probably a faster way, is by finding those allies in the system who are willing to change their policies and change their practice, because this objective referral criteria gives people the ability to consider restorative justice who might never have otherwise been told about restorative justice or be familiar with restorative justice. And in these communities, the parties only continue on to prosecution if they're unsuccessful at our process or if they decline the process. And so it still is voluntary, which is extremely important. And the restorative justice program is the one that's actually explaining what the process is and what the options include, which I think is also important as we're thinking about our partners, our system partners in this work might not always have the fluency in the restorative justice framing that we would like to use. And so I think finding spaces where you're able to convey those messages on behalf of your program, or finding your partners in the community if you are a part of the system, Those will be really important ways to make sure that our referral processes and the discretion that is inherently part of many of the decisions that are made throughout this process, it allows us to avoid those.
That is a wonderful transition to the last question. It's almost an extension of what we just discussed. So we're talking about getting community members involved, but how do you gain interest in community members? Like, how do we do that? And that's to anyone.
I can share. Oh, go ahead. Go ahead. No.
So I still, well, for my community, that the work that we do is that we are definitely embedded within our community. We come from very same communities, and the way that we get them involved, really just the work that we're doing today. Like I said earlier, I was a person, I was gang related, and I created so much harm within my community. So my community already knew me, the gang I was representing, and a lot of us did. And the fact that what we're doing today, it shows that change is possible, right? So now that when they children is dealing with struggling with anything, we're the first people they go to. They're like, oh, well, Eric, Bobby, and Amon and Noble's going through these same things. So look what they're doing today. So really just showing hope and that it is very possible. And any community events that's going on within the community, we're connected. We know what's going on in our community. We're at all the events in our community, and we add on and we aid and support. Even if it's not a resource event, we're still there to be there for the mothers that lost their child, for survivors. And so we're just involved in any which way we can, just show up anywhere how we can. And that's how we build trust with the community. But when you form that same community, I think it's easier when you're a product of that community.
Okay, thank you so much. Noble, Paco, did you have anything to add?
I just wanted to add sharing stories. You know, it was, I think that's what led a lot of groups, especially mothers groups, in the, I want to say 2009 to 2014, to create other groups, task forces, to come up with alternatives, right? And when they're included in the whole process, in the designing, the implementation, the redesigning, naturally community comes. And especially when we include youth, young adults, people with lived experience, that grew the community engagement part as well. And then, of course, I mentioned the outcomes, right? Because we want to include also those decision makers that are in the community. And when they see those outcomes, it comes even faster. So I just want to share that.
Avery, we also recognize that there are communities within communities. So when we talk about community partnership, we define what the community is, but depending on the individuals involved and who's been affected by the actions. So it's flexible in that sense. But all of our truly, they're called peacemakers. In these principles were trained by our indigenous peacemakers and came over and helped us, and we go and visit there. But community, I think, is one way to look at it, is who has been affected by what has happened. And how do we get that voice in? Because if they've been affected, they need to be part of the healing.
That is a great transition to us concluding the Q&A section and wrapping up today. There was one more comment about community and what healing can look like. How are we defining success when healing is nonlinear and messy at times? So thank you for getting to that it's about the community. It's about prevention, right? Like not doing that thing again, right? Causing more harm. But thank you so much, everyone. I'm going to go ahead and throw up one more last slide. Thank you to our panelists, for everyone attending. If you would like more information about today, well, first of all, after today's webinar, we're going to disseminate a fact sheet. We'd like to have you fill out our feedback form. We want to hear from you. We want to garner more webinar interest topics. We'll also make this recording available at our NCORJ.org website. If you want to learn more about restorative justice, I mean, these websites are perfect resources to go to. Also, our partners, the University of San Diego and Vermont Law and Graduate School, offer certificate programs in restorative justice. Currently, right now, the University of San Diego is offering scholarships on a rolling basis for its certificate program. So we'll attach a lot of that information in a follow-up email after today. Thank you again. Take care and have a great rest of the day wherever you are.